They left me at a gas station. My own son. My own blood. And when I walked out of that bathroom and saw empty asphalt where our car had been, I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I stood there in the heat of a July afternoon with my red suitcase beside me like a tombstone, and I made a decision that would change everything. My name is Esperanza. I'm 68 years old. And this is the story of the day my son threw me away like a piece of garbage, and the day I made him regret every single mile he drove without me. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the betrayal didn't start at that gas station. Betrayal never starts where you finally see it. It starts years before, in the small moments you chose to ignore. In the Christmas dinner you cooked for 2 days that ended up rotting in the refrigerator because your daughter-in-law decided the restaurant was more fun. In the money your son borrowed for car tires that somehow became a new watch on his wife's wrist. In the way they looked through you at family dinners like you were furniture that had been there so long it had become invisible. I raised Julian alone. 30 years ago I walked out on a man who didn't know my worth, and I swore that the child I carried would never know lack. I sewed strangers' dresses until my fingers swelled. I sold pastries at dawn. I worked sick when I should have been resting, rested only when my body refused to stand, and every sacrifice, every broken night, every dream I postponed, I poured into him. Into Julian. My only son. The center of my universe for 30 years. And he left me on the side of a highway with a text message. The trip had been Karina's idea. That should have been my first warning. Everything that ends in disaster usually starts with something that comes out of Karina's mouth dipped in honey. She called me 2 days before with that voice she used when she wanted something. Soft, sweet, slightly breathless, like a woman performing kindness rather than feeling it. Esperanza, the children need to see the ocean. You need a distraction. Come with us to the beach house. And I said yes. Because mothers always say yes when they think there's still a seat for them at the table. The morning of the trip, I ironed my best linen blouse. Cream-colored. I packed carefully. I made sandwiches for the road, the kind Julian had loved since he was 7 years old, with the crusts cut off and extra mustard. I was so eager to be useful, to be needed, that I didn't notice I was already disappearing. Already making myself smaller to fit into their plans. Julian drove the grey SUV. That SUV that I had helped finance with my retirement savings 2 years earlier, not because they asked nicely, but because I had offered before they could be embarrassed to ask. Karina sat in the front checking her reflection in the visor mirror. My grandchildren had their headphones in before we left the driveway. And I sat in the back, squeezed between the coolers and the beach bags because the trunk was full, and I told myself this was fine. I told myself this was what family looked like. Imperfect and cramped and real. For 300 kilometers I didn't say a word except to admire the landscape through the window. I ate half a sandwich. I watched the dry yellow fields pass like pages in a book I already knew the ending of. And when I finally, quietly, asked Julian to stop because I needed to use the restroom, he looked at me in the rearview mirror with eyes that were no longer the eyes of my son. They were the eyes of a man inconvenienced by his mother's aging body. We just stopped an hour ago, he said. There was no anger in his voice. That was almost worse. Just impatience, clean and cold, the way you speak to someone you've already written off. I apologized. I said I was sorry for needing things. And he pulled into a rundown gas station on the edge of nowhere, and Karina didn't look up from her nails when she said, 5 minutes, Esperanza. Don't take long. The bathroom smelled like cheap disinfectant and old water. I moved slowly because my body doesn't move any other way anymore. I washed my hands with gritty powder soap that scratched my skin. And I looked at myself in the spotted mirror above the sink, a 68-year-old woman in a cream linen blouse, hair pulled up with dignity, eyes asking a question she already feared the answer to. When did you become a burden, Esperanza? I walked back out into the heat. The space where the SUV had been parked was empty. I blinked. Once. Twice. I turned left, then right, as if the car might be hiding somewhere behind an air pump or a garbage can. The asphalt shimmered in the heat like a mirage. My heart began knocking against my ribs, not in panic yet, but in that terrible moment before panic arrives, when your body knows something your mind still refuses to accept. And then I saw them. My suitcase, standing upright on the sidewalk exactly where I had climbed out. My red suitcase, the one I'd carried on every trip I'd taken in 20 years. Standing there alone like a monument to abandonment. And next to it, my handbag, thrown on the ground like something you toss in a bin without looking. My legs went strange beneath me. I walked toward my things slowly, dragging my feet, feeling the ground tilt. I picked up my handbag. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. I found my phone. I opened it. And there was a message from Julian, sent 3 minutes before. Mom, I'm sorry. Things are tight with the kids' stuff, and honestly the atmosphere gets tense with you there. Better to take a bus. They come by regularly. We'll see you at the beach house. Left your suitcase so you don't have to carry weight. Kisses. I read it once. I read it again. I read it a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something a son would write to a mother he loved. The atmosphere gets tense with you there. I, who had not opened my mouth except to ask for a bathroom. I, who had packed their sandwiches and sat without complaining in the back seat between the coolers. I, who had spent 30 years making sure the atmosphere was always comfortable for him, always warm, always safe. I did not cry. Something in me went very still and very cold, the way water goes still before it freezes. The sound of trucks thundering past on the highway became distant, underwater, like noise in a dream. I stood on that sidewalk in the blistering July heat with my red suitcase and my whole life behind me, and I felt something shift in my chest. Something ancient and tired and done. I dragged my suitcase toward the gas station's small convenience store. The wheels scraped against the cracked concrete. Track, track, track. Each sound marking a second of my new life. The life that began the moment my son drove away from me. The store was cool inside and smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee. A bell chimed above the door. At the far end of the counter, a man emerged from the back room wiping his hands on a grease-covered cloth. Older, maybe my age or a few years beyond. White hair. A neatly trimmed beard. A blue mechanic's coverall over strong arms that had known hard work their entire life. He looked at me the way a man looks when he's seen everything a road can produce and isn't surprised by any of it. He didn't look at me with pity. That saved me. If he had looked at me with pity, I would have shattered right there on the linoleum floor. "Can I help you?" he asked. "A coffee," I said. My voice came out rough and low, barely recognizable. Black. Very strong. No sugar. He nodded once, set the rag on the counter, and turned to the machine. His movements were slow and deliberate, the movements of a man who had learned long ago that rushing things makes them worse. While steam rose from the machine, he asked without turning around, "Car trouble?" "The car is fine," I said. I was looking at my own hands in my lap. The swollen knuckles, the crooked fingers, the hands of a woman who had worked herself into this shape. "The problem is the driver." He paused for just a moment. Then he kept pouring. He brought me the coffee in a thick ceramic mug, not a disposable cup. The gesture was small and it nearly undid me. "They left without you," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, simple and dry, with no dramatic inflection. "Is it that obvious?" I asked. "I've been at this station for 40 years, he said, leaning against the counter. "I've seen people forget dogs, forget wallets, forget to fill the tank. But when someone leaves a suitcase and a woman sitting on top of it, that's not forgetting. That's something else. What do you call it?" I asked. "A cruelty," he said. Just like that. No hesitation. The word hung in the air between us. The exact right word. Not a mistake. Not an oversight. A deliberate act of cruelty. I wrapped both hands around the hot mug and felt the warmth move into my cold fingers. "My name is Antonio," he said. "Esperanza," I answered. And when I said my own name, I felt the strange bitter irony of it. Hope. My name was Hope, and I had just been discarded on a highway in the middle of summer by the person I had given that hope to for 30 years. Antonio told me the next bus wouldn't come until 6 the following morning. This route wasn't commercial. I would be spending the night alone at a roadside gas station, abandoned by my son, with nowhere to go and no one expecting me. I should have been destroyed by that information. I expected to be destroyed by it. Instead, something else happened. A clarity arrived, cold and clean and absolute, the way a fever breaks and suddenly you can see the room again. The fog of 30 years of making myself smaller, of swallowing my own needs, of staying quiet to keep the peace. It burned away in that July heat, and what was left underneath was something I hadn't met in a very long time. I drank the coffee. It was bitter and strong and perfect. And I began to think. The beach house. The one they were driving toward. The one I owned. Every brick, every tile, every window frame paid for with my hands, my back, my years. My name was on the deed. My name was on the insurance. And they were there right now, making themselves comfortable in my home, probably already pouring wine and turning up the music, probably already laughing. About how the old woman would arrive tomorrow on the bus, scared and grateful, ready to sign whatever they put in front of her. I opened my handbag. I began going through it methodically, the way a surgeon lays out tools before an operation. My wallet. My blood pressure medication. A wooden rosary my mother gave me before she died. And then, tucked in the inner pocket, a thick manila envelope that I had completely forgotten about in the chaos of the trip. Karina had called me 2 days before the trip with that urgent, slightly breathless voice she used when she wanted something done quickly and didn't want you to think too hard about it. Suegra, bring the deed to the beach house and the insurance papers. There are changes happening in the coastal development zone, and we need everything on hand in case an inspector comes by. Don't forget. It's for your own good. For your own good. The magic words. The words that had controlled me for years. I untied the red cord on the envelope. My bent fingers moved with a precision I thought arthritis had stolen from me. I pulled out the documents. The notarized deed, thick and heavy, was clear. Sole owner, Esperanza Valdez. But behind it, there was something I hadn't put there. A printed document on plain paper, unsigned. I read it once. I read it again. It was a living transfer agreement. A donation of property, free of encumbrances, to be transferred to Julian Martinez Valdez. There was a clause about lifetime usufruct, meaning I could remain living in the property, but buried in the fine print was a line that stopped my blood cold. The usufruct could be revoked if the mental competency of the donor was found to be compromised. I sat with that paper in my hands for a long moment. The coffee had gone slightly cold. Outside, a truck roared past, shaking the windows. They hadn't taken me on a trip. They had taken me to the slaughterhouse. The whole architecture of the last 48 hours assembled itself in front of me with a hideous clarity. Karina insisting I come. The deliberately tense atmosphere in the car. The abandonment at the gas station. Not impulsive, not a fight that went too far, but planned, step by step, while I was in that bathroom. They wanted me frightened. They wanted me isolated. They wanted me to arrive at that beach house tomorrow morning after a night alone on a highway bench. Exhausted and shaken and so grateful to be let inside that I would sign anything without reading it. And the mental competency clause. If I resisted, they could declare me senile. They had constructed a trap that worked in both directions. If I cooperated, they stole my house. If I refused, they would say I was too unwell to make my own decisions. What's wrong? Antonio asked. He had noticed my face change. They weren't taking me on vacation, I said, and my voice was perfectly level. They were taking me to be slaughtered. I explained what I held in my hands. Antonio listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening as I spoke. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. What kind of son does this to his mother? He said. Not loudly. Just the plain statement of a man confronting something that violated his understanding of how people should behave. The kind I raised without realizing what I was building, I said. And for the first time, I didn't rush to defend Julian. I let the truth sit in the air without softening it. I kept looking through my bag. And there, at the bottom, attached to my keyring, the spare key to the SUV. I had kept a copy for years because Julian was always losing his keys. I had pressed it between my fingers, feeling the ridges of the metal, and something in my chest settled into a hard, quiet resolve. Antonio, I said, looking at him directly. That SUV they're driving, do you know whose name is on the loan? He tilted his head, one eyebrow raising slowly. Julian had gambling debts 6 years ago, I said. His credit was destroyed. When he wanted to buy that car, I put my signature on the loan. I used my city house as collateral. I paused. Legally, that vehicle is mine until the last payment clears. Antonio looked at me for a long moment. Then a small smile crossed his face beneath the white beard. How would you like to get to the coast? He asked. We left an hour later in his ancient Ford truck, my red suitcase thrown in the back between tool crates and parts wrapped in newspaper, handled with more respect than my own son had shown me in years. When the heavy metal door closed, the sound sealed something shut permanently. I looked back at the gas station through the side mirror as we pulled onto the highway. I watched it shrink and disappear. I said goodbye to the woman I had been. The woman who apologized for existing. The woman who made herself small so others could feel large. She stayed at that gas station. She didn't get in the truck. For the first hour we drove in silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Necessary silence. I needed to think. I watched the telephone poles streak past and let the memories come, one by one, all the signals I had chosen to ignore. The Christmas dinner. The money for the tires that became a watch on Karina's wrist. The way they spoke to me at family gatherings as though I were a minor character in their story rather than the author of it. You know what hurts most, I said eventually. It's not the abandonment. It's the blindness. I saw every sign. Every single one. And I looked away from all of them because I thought that if I gave enough, if I stayed quiet enough, if I made myself small enough, they would love me more. But the smaller you make yourself, the easier it becomes for people to step on you. Antonio bit down on the toothpick he'd been rolling across his lips. The love of a mother, he said, can be the thickest blindfold there is. And some children are born with dry hearts. It's not your fault you kept watering something that was dead at the root. I looked out the window at the dark fields passing under the stars. A plant dead at the root. Yes, that was exactly it. And I had spent 30 years with a watering can, wondering why nothing bloomed. We stopped in a small town after dark and ate tacos from a street cart standing beside the truck. The sauce was spicy and the night air was cool, and I felt more alive in that moment than I had felt in years. Karina would have called it poverty food. Karina wasn't there. Antonio told me about his wife, who had died of cancer a decade earlier, and a daughter who had gone north and sent a card twice a year. The loneliness is only bad when someone else decides it for you, he said. You were lonelier in that car surrounded by your family than I've ever been here alone. He was right. I had been profoundly alone for years. I just hadn't been allowed to admit it. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Julian. He had called half an hour ago. They had arrived at the beach house and discovered they needed something. The documents, probably, or perhaps a small twinge of conscience had flickered on briefly before being extinguished. More likely they were calculating what time I'd arrive at the bus terminal so they could manage the theater of going to collect me. I turned off my phone. That small action, that deliberate silence, was my first act of power. For the first time in years, I was not available. I was not waiting for their call. I was occupied with reclaiming my life. The sign for Playa Miramar came up 10 kilometers out. I asked Antonio to park in the shadow of a large almond tree around the corner from the house. I didn't want them to see the truck yet. The element of surprise was my only tactical advantage, and I had every intention of using it. Are you sure you don't want me to come in? Antonio asked. This is between them and me, I said, unclipping my seatbelt. I need to see their faces when they think they've won. I need them to take off their masks completely before I take off mine. Wait here. If I don't message you in an hour, then come knock. I'll be right here, he said, watching like a guard dog. I walked the 50 meters to my property alone, pulling my red suitcase through the sand. My feet knew this path. I had walked it 100 summers. The house wasn't a mansion, it was mine, which made it worth more than any mansion. Every room had been paid for in sleepless nights and aching hands. All the lights were on. Not the soft, private light of a resting family, a blazing, wasteful light, the light of people celebrating. I could hear music through the walls before I reached the gate. That heavy, pounding reggaeton my grandchildren worshipped, vibrating the glass of my windows, shaking the frames I had hung with my own hands. I turned my key in the garden gate. The lock opened silently. I had oiled it myself, every season. I moved through the bougainvillea bushes to the window and looked in. Julian was stretched out on my best sofa, the one with the floral upholstery I kept covered in dry seasons, with his shoes still on, sandy feet on my coffee table. Beer in one hand. Laughing at something Karina said from the kitchen. And Karina, my daughter-in-law, was walking through my kitchen wearing my dressing gown. My peach silk robe. The one I kept for special occasions. She had gone into my bedroom wardrobe and pulled it out as if it belonged to her. Because in her mind, it already did. I heard her voice clearly through the glass. Trust me. When she shows up tomorrow on that dusty bus, she'll be so tired and scared she'll sign anything we put in front of her. Just keep the papers ready and pour her a glass of wine first. Julian took a long pull of beer. I don't know, Carrie. She's old. Maybe we went too far. Don't be soft, Julian. Your mother is a drama queen. She's probably already asleep on a bench somewhere, playing the martyr. What matters is we get the signature for the notary. Without her name on the transfer, we can't use the house as collateral for the business loan. The bank won't touch us because she's retired. We need this. So there it was. Not just the beach house. They wanted to mortgage it. To fund one of Julian's businesses. The ones that had failed every time before. The ones I had quietly bailed out twice already with money I never asked to be repaid. They wanted to use my property as fuel for a fire that would leave me with nothing when it burned out. I stood in my own garden outside my own window listening to my son and his wife plan the efficient dismantling of everything I had built, and I felt a cold fury condense inside my chest into something very small and very hard and very permanent. Like a diamond forming under pressure. I walked to the front door. I turned the handle. I stepped inside. The music was so loud they didn't hear me enter. I stood in the doorway of my living room with my red suitcase beside me, a ghost returning from the grave to collect what was owed. My oldest grandson looked up first. His face went completely blank, then alarmed. He elbowed his brother. Someone hit pause on the music. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian choked on his beer. He scrambled upright from my sofa, serviette half tucked in his collar, the picture of a guilty man caught mid-celebration. Karina turned from the kitchen and nearly dropped her wine glass. She went pale beneath her makeup, the arrogance draining from her face like water down a drain. "Mama," Julian breathed. "Good evening," I said. My voice was calm, warm, even. The voice of the Esperanza they knew, the compliant one, the accommodating mother. I needed them to feel safe just a little longer. "I see you started without me. We thought," the message said, "how did you get here so fast?" Karina managed. "God is great," I said simply, setting my suitcase down by the door. A very kind man, a delivery driver coming this direction, saw me at the roadside. I was lucky. Very lucky not to be left there like an animal. I watched Julian's shoulders drop with relief. He believed it. Of course he did, because it never crossed his mind that I was capable of anything but exactly what he expected. For decades I had performed the role of harmless, dependent, grateful, invisible. He had no reason to think the performance had ended. Karina recovered quickly, shifting back into her management mode. So glad you made it safely, Esperanza. We were about to go look for you, weren't we, Amor? She pinched Julian's arm. Yes, absolutely, he said. We were just about to leave. I looked at the empty wine bottles, the overflowing plates, the evidence of an evening that had been going on for hours without a single moment of anxiety on their behalf. Of course you were, I said pleasantly. Karina moved to intercept me before I could head toward the master bedroom. The thing is, since we didn't expect you tonight, the boys have their gaming equipment set up in your room. The big TV and everything. You know how they are. She smiled, the smile of a woman who has already decided the outcome. We made up the guest room for you. It's at the back. Very fresh air. The guest room. The small airless room at the back of the house that we used to store the deck chairs and cleaning supplies. The room with no air conditioning and a mattress that sagged in the middle. They were exiling me from my own bed in my own home. I smiled at her. I nodded. Of course, Karina. I don't want to disturb the boys. The back room is perfectly fine. I watched triumph light up in her eyes. She thought she had won again. She thought the abandonment had worked, that I had arrived just broken enough to be manageable, just grateful enough to accept crumbs. I went to the back room. I set my suitcase down in the dark. I sat on the edge of the hard mattress and in the privacy of my exile, I smiled. Not a gentle smile. Something that belonged to a different woman entirely. I didn't sleep. I had no intention of sleeping. I waited. I listened to the voices in the living room quiet down, the music get softer, the laughter become whispers. I heard Karina say, "Relax, she's exhausted. Tomorrow morning, good breakfast, papers on the table, pen in her hand. Done." I heard Julian murmur something I couldn't make out. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Bedroom doors. Silence. I waited another hour. Then 2. When the silence had settled deep and heavy over the house, I took off my shoes, opened my door without a sound, and moved through the darkness like a woman who had nothing left to lose and therefore nothing left to fear. I went to the kitchen first. Behind the cereal boxes on the second shelf, Karina's version of Clever, I found the blue folder. I took it to my room and read it under the glow of my phone screen. It was worse than the draft I'd found in the envelope. This was the final version. Not a donation, a total cessation of administrative rights, with the allegation that I lacked the mental capacity to manage my own assets. Signed by a notary they had already approached, waiting only for my signature at the bottom. They were going to declare me incompetent to own the things I had spent my whole life building. I messaged Antonio. Rat is in the trap. Come at 8 tomorrow morning. Bring your toolbox. He replied in 2 minutes. I'll be there, boss. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the edge of that bad mattress in the dark, going over every word I would say, every move I would make. I thought about the spare key to the SUV in my pocket. I thought about the insurance papers in the glove compartment. I thought about 30 years of receipts, sacrifices, and signatures, all of them mine, all of them adding up to this moment. When the first light came through the small window, I got up, washed my face with cold water, put on my best beach dress, white with blue flowers, the one that made me feel like myself, fixed my hair, touched my lips with color, and went to the kitchen to cook. I made the kind of breakfast that disarms people. I squeezed fresh orange juice. I fried eggs the way Karina liked them. I made Julian's favorite chilaquiles. I filled the house with the smell of coffee and warmth and the deception of a mother who has forgiven everything and expects nothing. Julian came down first, squinting against the light, hungover and confused by the smell of home cooking. I poured him coffee. I told him not to worry about yesterday. I said we were at the beach, we were family, that was what mattered. I watched the confusion on his face. He had expected either tears or accusations, not this. He sat down and ate. Karina came next, still wearing my robe. She covered her surprise with sarcasm. Someone slept well. And I smiled and put eggs in front of her and said the rested conscience makes the best pillow, which she didn't understand but chose to ignore. They ate. They relaxed. They let their guards come down along with their second cups of coffee. And when their plates were cleared and they were leaning back in their chairs with the comfortable confidence of people who believe the hard work is already done, I folded my hands on the table. "I've been thinking," I said. Karina's eyes sharpened. Julian straightened slightly. "You're right that I'm getting older. That things should be organized clearly. I found the blue folder in the kitchen last night." I paused to let that settle. Karina went very still. I read it. And I think it's time we talked honestly about who controls what in this family. I stood, walked to the counter, took the folder, and placed it in the center of the table like a piece of evidence at a trial. "Do you have a pen?" I asked. Julian nearly fell off his chair reaching for one. Karina's smile was enormous, predatory, the smile of someone who has played this game before and never lost. They believed the old woman had capitulated. They thought the night in the back room, the isolation, the exhaustion, they thought all of it had worked. "Before I sign," I said, turning the pen slowly in my fingers, "there's one small clause I'd like to discuss. A clause about the vehicle outside and about who has the legal right to be under this roof." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Long, deliberate, insistent. Julian frowned. Who would come at this hour? "I'll get it," I said, standing and laying the pen down carefully on the table. "Unsigned. I believe it's the locksmith." "Locksmith?" Karina's brow furrowed. "Why do we need a locksmith?" I looked at her then. The soft smile I had been wearing all morning disappeared. What replaced it was something quiet and absolute, the expression of a woman who has nothing left to pretend. "Because someone lost the keys to their life, Karina. And I'm making sure they can't find the way back in." I walked to the door and opened it wide. Antonio stood on my doorstep in the morning light, punctual as a clock, red toolbox in one hand, the patient solid look of a man who had shown up when he said he would. Behind him, parked at an angle that perfectly blocked the SUV from leaving the driveway, sat his ancient Ford. "Good morning, Dona Esperanza. Shall I start with the front door or the garage?" I stepped aside to let him in. "Start wherever you like, Antonio. Just make sure the locks are strong. I have a two-legged pest problem that I need to clear out today." I turned toward the dining room. Julian and Karina were on their feet. The color had left their faces so completely they looked like photographs of themselves. What followed was not quiet. Karina pulled off the mask entirely and showed me who she had always been underneath. Loud, grasping, cruel in the particular way of someone who has never been told no by anyone who mattered. She told me I was old and useless and alone. She told me Julian was only trying to protect what would eventually belong to his children. She told me I was selfish for clinging to property I would someday leave behind anyway. Every word bounced off me. I stood in my living room while Antonio's drill sang behind me, and I felt nothing she threw at me land. I showed them the fine print about the mental competency clause. I explained calmly what abandoning an elderly person on a federal highway constitutes under the law. I held up the spare car keys. I reminded them whose name was on the loan, whose house they were standing in, whose health insurance covered Karina's last 2 cosmetic procedures. I watched Julian understand, finally and completely, how thoroughly he had miscalculated. Not just today, his entire life. He had looked at a foundation and seen a floor to walk on. He had never once thought about what happened if the foundation decided it was done holding the weight. Karina threatened to call the police. I told her to please do exactly that, and to make sure they brought someone who could explain to her the legal difference between a property owner changing her locks and a fraud attempt requiring the victim to certify her own incompetence. Her own lawyer, it turned out, had already tried to tell her some version of this. She hadn't listened. I gave them 10 minutes to pack. Antonio stood by the door with his arms crossed, and somehow his presence, quiet, immovable, a man who had shown me more respect in 12 hours than my family had shown me in years, communicated everything that needed to be communicated without a word. They left dragging expensive luggage through sand that grabbed at their wheels. My grandchildren went behind them, confused and filming everything on their phones, which struck me as appropriate. Let them document it. Let them have the record. Julian paused at the gate. He looked back at me one last time, searching my face for the mother he recognized. The soft one, the one who would always relent, who would call him back, who would say it was fine. She understood, of course she forgave him. He didn't find her. She had retired permanently the day before, in a gas station bathroom off a federal highway, looking at herself in a spotted mirror. Karina, at the gate, turned and told me I would die alone and no one would come to my funeral. Better alone than in the company I've been keeping, I said. And don't worry about my funeral. I've already paid for it in full. With my money. The money you wanted so badly. Antonio closed the door. The new lock clicked into place. I stood in the center of my living room. The silence it left behind was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of a room that had been cleaned. I could hear the ocean through the walls. My ocean. My house. My life. I picked up the blue folder from the table. I tore it in half, then in quarters, then into pieces too small to reassemble. I walked to the terrace where my son had lit the grill the night before to celebrate a victory that was never his to claim, and I threw the pieces into the coals. I watched the paper curl and blacken, watched the word incapacity catch fire and become ash. Antonio stood beside me with a glass of wine and the quiet dignity of a witness at something sacred. Later that afternoon, we sat on my terrace and ate fish I cooked myself, Zarandeado style, with lime and chili and smoke, while the sun laid an orange road across the water. We ate slowly. We tasted everything. I had not eaten a meal like that in years, not because I couldn't afford it, but because I had spent so long serving others that I had forgotten I was allowed a seat at my own table. 3 months passed. The SUV was sold. I wanted nothing in my life that carried the memory of that highway. The money paid off the loan and left enough for a small compact car, electric blue, a color I had always wanted and never allowed myself. Too flashy for a woman my age, I used to think. Now I drove it every morning to the market and felt the pleasure of having exactly what I wanted. The back room became my studio. I tore down the wall to the garden and put in a wide window and filled the space with fabric and thread and the work of my own hands. Not sewing for others to survive anymore, but making things that were beautiful. He said Karina had left. Cleaned out the joint account, took the furniture, left him with the debts and the boys. He said he was 3 months behind on everything. He said he was about to be evicted. He asked if he could come stay at the beach house, just temporarily, just until he found his feet. He even said he would take the back room. He didn't seem to realize the poetry of that. I listened to my son's voice, smaller than I had ever heard it, stripped of the performance he had maintained for so long, genuinely frightened for perhaps the first time in his adult life, and I felt the old reflexes activate. The pull to fix, to rescue, to throw myself between him and the consequences of his choices. I let the pull arise. I felt it fully. And then I let it pass. I'm sorry you're going through this, I said. And I meant it. Whatever he had done to me, he was still the child I had carried, and watching him fail was not the victory it might have looked like from the outside. I need help, Mama. Just alone. Or let me come to the beach, just for a while. No, Julian. The word was gentle. It was also final. You have 2 hands. 2 legs. A university degree I paid for by breaking my back over a sewing machine for 20 years. You are 40 years old and you are healthy and you have every resource you need to rebuild your life from the ground up. What you do not have is my permission to rebuild it on top of mine. He tried the last card. The oldest card. You don't love me anymore? I love you enough to refuse to keep making you helpless, I said. I love you enough that this time, I'm going to let you grow. When you've worked your way out of this on your own, when you've learned what it costs to build something with your hands, when you've found a way to look at me that doesn't calculate what I'm worth to your balance sheet, come find me. I'll make you a coffee and we'll sit down like 2 people who respect each other. But until then, don't call me asking for anything." I hung up. My hand was trembling. Refusing your child is not a natural act. It goes against something cellular and ancient. But there are moments when the kindest thing a mother can do is step back and let the ground be gone. Antonio came in from the garden and saw my face. He came and put his hand on my shoulder and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "You did right, Esperanza." "I know," I said. "It still hurts." "Growth hurts," he said. "Yours and his." I heard eventually, through the particular telegraph system of small coastal towns where news travels faster than the wind, that Julian had taken a job in a warehouse moving inventory. Hard, physical, honest work. That the boys, without consoles and unlimited internet, had begun kicking a football in the park after school and had become, by all accounts, more themselves. That Karina had filed a lawsuit that her own attorney had dismissed within the week. That she had found someone new within 6 months, a businessman reportedly less patient than my son, and that she seemed, from a distance, to be in the process of learning the same lessons in a different classroom. I changed my will. A notary I trusted, chosen by me, attended to it. The bulk of my estate goes to a foundation I created, for older women who have been abandoned by the people they spent their lives building. A portion, conditional on demonstrated responsibility and honest work, will go to my grandchildren when they turn 25. Julian is not excluded. But he will have to earn his place at the table, the way I earned everything I have. Sometimes in the evenings I sit on my terrace with a glass of wine and I watch the water move in the last light, and I think about that gas station. The bathroom with the spotted mirror. The moment I walked out into the heat and found an empty space where my family had been. And I am grateful. Not despite the pain of it, because of the pain of it. If Julian had come back. If he had apologized halfway. If they had let me back in the car and pretended nothing happened, I would have accepted it. I would have climbed in and gone back to being apology. I would have signed those papers eventually. I would have spent whatever years I have left making myself invisible in my own life. The abandonment saved me. It handed me back to myself. Today I am not the Esperanza who waits. I am not the Esperanza who apologizes for taking up space. I do not make myself small for anyone's convenience. I drive my blue car too fast with the windows down. I eat street food and drink good wine, and I have danced, twice, in public squares, with a man who looks at me like I am worth looking at. I have climbed pyramids slowly and swum in cenotes, and I have woken up every morning in my own house, in my own bed, with the sound of the ocean as my alarm clock, knowing that everything in my life, every cup, every key, every lock, belongs to me and was earned by me and cannot be taken without my consent. To every woman who has been made to feel like a burden, like a piece of furniture that has stayed too long in a room that has moved on. Hear me. You are not the furniture. You are the house. You are the foundation. And if the people living in you don't know how to value what holds them up, then change the locks. Clear the rooms. Open the windows and let the good air back in. The loneliness you choose is a palace. The company you beg for is a cage. Know where your documents are. Keep your own keys. And if someone ever leaves you on the side of the road thinking they've broken you, sit down, catch your breath, and order the strongest coffee they have. Because the best part of the journey begins the moment you decide you're the one driving.